Do they have social media in Star Wars and the year in review on this technology edition of Industry Focus? Greetings, fools. I am Sean Darth O'Reilly, joining you here from Fool Headquarters in Alexandria, Virginia. It is Friday, December 18th, 2015, and joining me to talk is the man that we're reasonably sure is a Jedi, Mr. Dylan Lewis.
Wow. So if you're Darth, then am I Luke, or am I Han, or am I Anakin?
You really actually don't know anything about Star Wars.
I don't know anything about Star Wars.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I'm actually not like a diehard fan like Michael Douglas upstairs.
Yes.
But I've seen all the movies. I enjoy it. I enjoy being entertained.
And you'll be seeing the newest movie today, courtesy
I
of Fool.
will. For those of you that do not know, Dylan and I happen to work for the coolest company in the world, and one of the things that they did to be super cool was renting out an entire movie theater up the road here, and we're all going for free.
We have, what, like 100 selling seats?
There's like 130 people going.
Yeah.
It's going to be a good time.
It will be a historically unproductive Friday morning.
So you have 20 minutes to talk to me, and then I'm leaving.
Yeah. I'd say friendship is being willing to do the podcast 2 hours early so that you can go watch a Star Wars movie.
Yeah, true. So really quick, before we do our year in review, which, I don't know, you consider it regifting or something?
Yeah. I think this episode is the podcast equivalent of regifting everything that we've done.
Awesome.
Because we are going to revisit a couple things. I got some recent developments on some stories we talked about months ago, and hopefully we can bring some closure. We're not going to be able to bring entire closure to this because
These are all long-tail stories.
some of these are long-tail stories that are just going to drag on for a while.
So before we dive in, I'm anxious to get your thoughts. Do they have Facebook and Twitter in the Star Wars universe?
Ooh, I don't know.
Like, would Luke Skywalker tweet stuff? Like, would that...
I want to make a joke so badly, but I don't know the universe well enough to
it's
even like make a reference.
It just seemed weird to me because Star Wars has all this futuristic stuff and hyperspace and space travel and all this stuff, but
Maybe they've moved beyond that.
you think?
Yeah, maybe they're at the singularity level.
I live for the day when mankind is not glued to their phones.
Yeah.
That would be wonderful.
We will see.
All right, so what is the first story?
The first
that we're
story
talking about?
we're going to rehash is something we talked about in April. The name of the podcast was "Is Europe Picking on Google?" And this was, of course,
That was in April?
That was in April. So that was, I think, maybe
June, July, August.
maybe a month into us doing the show together. Wow. Because I took over for Nathan Hamilton.
Has it really been 8 months?
Something like that, yeah.
Wow.
It's been a while.
All right.
So that whole episode really focused on the European Commission, branch of the European Union's regulatory body, and their efforts to kind of rein in Google and kind of what they perceive as some of the anti-competitive measures that Google's currently using with its shopping add-on product to
Don't
search.
they know that Google is in the Merriam-Webster dictionary? Once that happens, you can't. It's there. You can't stop it.
But it's the verb, right? It's not.
it's
not
verb.
the proper noun.
It is. Yeah.
Sorry, I had to get editorial. on you there for a
we'll
second.
talk about this later, but all I'm going to say is Bing is not in there.
So just as a refresher, the European Commission was plotting a fine as large as $6.4 billion against Google, and this was, of course, roughly about a tenth of their annual revenue. And
It apparently slipped my mind. That's actually quite large.
it's quite large, yeah. And just a refresher, and this is a quote from the EC, Google gives systematic favorable treatment to its comparison shopping product, currently called Google Shopping, in its general search result pages, e.g. by showing Google Shopping more prominently on the screen. It may therefore artificially divert traffic from rival comparison shopping services and hinder their ability to compete on the market.
Wow.
So this is an anti-competitive claim against them. And, not much more to it than that.
They are more than willing to use Russia's Yandex. I would think. I don't know. They're more than capable of doing that if they want.
This is something we talked about last time on the show. There is kind of the counter argument to all this. Like, yes, they have the 90% market share in desktop searching, Europe, but like they build a really great product. Why wouldn't they want to feature some of their really great stuff in there? EC is also currently looking into some issues with Google Android, and this has to do a little bit more with app bundling and whether Google is doing some anti-competitive measures based on like forced app bundling and possibly crowding out potential competitors with things like maps and things like that are forced onto the platform when they enter an agreement with the smartphone manufacturer because their operating system would power the device.
This actually seems, Actually, okay. So let's do the what's up now portion because it seems like the Android portion, it seems like you might have a better case with Android because they run the actual operating system, and that has a Microsofty feel to it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyway, okay, so what's going on with this stuff now?
Yeah, so this was probably one of the more interesting, like really in the weeds tech things that I've read in a while. Like I was talking with Vince a couple weeks ago when he filled in for you about the patent disputes back and forth between Apple and Samsung and how those have been kind of put to bed recently, but that it was kind of a side of tech that a lot of investors don't really get a sense for unless you really seek it out.
Tech wars.
It's one of these things that kind of drag on. And it's kind of like the dark underbelly of tech, right? That's what I joked about before we started doing the show. And this is kind of along the same lines where it's like, it's really in the weeds and it's kind of insidery, but if you like that, then this is a really fun story to watch. And there was this kind of scathing article put together by The Guardian, went out earlier this week. The headline was, "Revealed how Google enlisted members of U.S. Congress it bankrolled to fight $6 billion EU antitrust case." And so that is maybe a little harsher than the reality, but that's still pretty loaded. And
so they're calling Congress to call up their counterparts in Europe to...
Yeah. Calling in the infantry, right? To help them out, or the cavalry to help them out. Some of the bullet points from the story. So between December 2014 and June 2015, according to The Guardian, Google held more high-level meetings with commission officials than any other company. From 2010 to 2014, Google has more than quadrupled its annual lobbying spend in Brussels, which is where the EC case is based. It's up to over $4 million, which really isn't that much given the scope of Google. But I think that ramp up is just a testament to what they're looking to do in terms of influencing policy there and the decision of the regulatory body. Google has employed several former EU officials as in-house lobbyists and has funded European think tanks and university research favorable to its position as part of a broader campaign.
Whoa. What are they doing with universities? This is crazy.
Yeah, so I mean, this is looking for research and academic publishing that is favorable.
You're an economics professor. Come up with a good paper.
Yeah. And last year, Google spent twice as much on lobbying in Brussels than Apple, Facebook, Yahoo, and Twitter and Uber combined.
I don't buy the Uber thing because they had that whole Paris altercation with the taxi. Yeah, anyway.
But so it's very clear that, and this is something we talked about when we first brought it up, was Google said, they sent out a memo to everyone around. They're like, in-house, that we're going to fight this. We think that there's no grounds for this. This is something that we're going to go to battle on. And I think that this scale up here is just kind of a testament to, they are rounding up the cavalry, like I said, and just coming at them with everything they've got. And some members, some publicly elected officials from the U.S. also seem to have been involved. There were some memos that The Guardian got a hold of. One of them in particular, some U.S. members of Congress, many of whom have received campaign funding from Google, wrote to the EC in November, basically called some of the acts that they're going after ones that would deter continued innovation and investment from U.S.-based internet companies.
Okay.
Yeah. So, so there's a lot going on there. I think it's just really fascinating to see how big tech companies combat unfavorable regulatory environment. So that's kind of what's going on the Google Shopping side. Unfortunately, we're not going to have any resolution on this for years. So as much as I'd love to wrap this up and put a bow on it for the holidays.
Next holiday season.
Yes. So maybe we'll check in on it then. But on the Android issue that we mentioned earlier, another not a ton to update on there. There was a Reuters report in September that said the EC is still yet to determine whether it will charge Google with market abuse with its Android mobile efforts. So that is another kind of ongoing thing.
Is this, refresh everybody's memory, was this as bad as what, and I alluded to this earlier, but you remember in the 90s, Microsoft was charged with blatantly blocking Netscape and putting Internet Explorer on their operating systems?
Yeah, or do you mean
is this that bad?
Do you mean in terms of the fine itself?
Yes. Or in what Google was doing and the fines and everything?
Yeah, and so for total dollars, I think the original fine that was levied against Microsoft was like $600 million or something like that. So I mean, adjust for inflationary measures. But I
But
think
even then, it'd be like 700 or 800 million now.
But I think what they wound up paying was multiples of that.
Oh, really?
Because they dragged it out and weren't compliant for a long time.
Oh, that's
and
fun. Okay.
thought that they were being compliant. So I think the final settlement was like 1.5 or 2
Okay.
billion. Yeah.
Wow.
So still about a third of what Google's looking at in
Yeah.
terms of unadjusted dollars, at least.
Cool. All right, well, before we move on, I wanted to point our listeners to the newly redesigned Focus.Fool.com. All Loyal IF listeners have access to a special discount on the Motley Fool's Stock Advisor newsletter that works out to $129 for a full 2-year subscription. Just go to Focus.Fool.com to take advantage of this offer. Once again, that's Focus.Fool.com. All right, so Dylan, we got about, 8-10 minutes left before I run out and go to the movie theater.
Yes.
What's the other story we're going to be talking about?
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to provide a refresher on, thankfully, this is something that we can kind of tie up in a nice little bow for the holidays. This is something we talked about in November in the episode Beat Up Tech Stocks. Can Pandora, FireEye, and HP's new business segment turn it around? We're going to focus on the Pandora side of the Beat Up Tech Stocks discussed in that episode.
I was going to say, there's no resolution to the other stuff. So,
And just as a refresher, basically what we were talking about on that show was the volatility surrounding Pandora because of the impending Copyright Royalty Board decision and on webcasting IV and the large impact that would have on the company's cost structure.
and if memory serves, this is a big deal for
Yeah,
Pandora.
huge
This
deal.
is- yeah.
And in the, probably 2 months or so leading up to mid-December, there had been some pretty wild price swings on the stock. And a lot of it was related to, at first, CRB admitting that the agreement that Pandora had with Merlin, which is an independent label representative body, would be an admissible benchmark for the negotiations with SoundExchange, SoundExchange being kind of a more major label representative. So that was one major thing that's kind of moved things around. And then secondly, there was also a comment from the CRB that there wouldn't be any distinction between indie labels and major labels in terms of, the ability to collect higher royalty rates on songs. So, there was no strength position
Right.
there for SoundExchange to be coming from. So because of these two things, it seemed going into mid-December when we were expecting the CRB decision that things would be kind of playing out in a more favorable way for Pandora. As it turns out, that's what happened.
Yay.
Yeah.
It was entirely speculative at the time, though.
Entirely speculative.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people started kind of like, reading the tarot cards and
Yeah.
saying, this looks like how it's moving. But there was always the possibility that, there were going to be
Yeah.
disappointing results. And I think that's why you saw so much volatility with the stock in the lead up to this. And so earlier this week, CRB released its official ruling on royalty rates for WebIV. Ad-supported free streams will cost Pandora $0.0017. So that is
17%
of a cent. Yes.
Yeah.
And subscription.
Not quite 1/5 of a penny. There.
Yes. Subscription streams will cost 0.0022.
Okay, so that's a fifth
or
of a penny.
A fifth
Yeah.
of a penny, just about. And so,
And this is going, of course, to the labels for the layman.
yes.
Okay.
It's going to SoundExchange to distribute to the labels.
Okay, yeah.
2015 rates, so what they were operating under for current cost structure,
Right.
had Pandora paying 0.0014 and 0.0025 respectively.
We're sorry, folks. We're not used to this many decimal places.
Yeah, that's a lot to get through. They usually state these as
Yeah.
100 play metrics, which
Yeah.
probably would have been smarter for the show. But so on the surface, this
So,
looks kind of disappointing, right? So
Yeah.
you look at it and you're like, okay, these ad-supported free streams are going to cost more. The subscription streams will be costing less.
Right.
Maybe it's a wash altogether. But you saw the stock move, I think, 10 to 15%.
To the upside.
To the upside this week. So obviously favorable market reaction. And I think that really gets into what the bear side of this negotiation could have looked like. Really, I think anything that came in at less than a fifth of a penny per play was going to be good for Pandora. And that's what, on the free side. And so that's why analysts in the market had this really favorable reaction. One of the interesting aspects of this, and I know that you had a particularly interesting take on it, was just the 17 hundredths of a cent rate on non-subscription plays being tied to inflation, and that being the escalator year to year.
Why? How did they pick that?
I don't know.
The Consumer Price Index is what the federal government uses to figure out people's Social Security checks every year. The increase, like
and like COLA.
it's
for
dumb.
raises.
Janet Yellen talks about it when she's talking about her inflation targets.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Tech actually usually experiences deflation. Computers get cheaper. Software gets cheaper. This stuff gets.
Talent gets more expensive. Talent gets more expensive.
Well, fine. I was. Just, it seems like they picked that in the absence of any other better option.
Yeah, but it plays out extremely well for Pandora. If you look, basically the escalation of their costs. So if you're tying it to CPI, let's say inflation looks like it might be 1.5%, 2%,
No.
maybe. In a rising interest rate environment, it's probably less. You know, so that's what you'd anticipate. Their ad-supported streams will go up by year over year. They were looking at.
So we got tons of clarity here.
Yeah.
Oodles of clarity.
And they were experiencing year-over-year royalty increases of like 9% prior to this. So this adds a lot of just kind of a much smoother cost structure for them,
Right.
Which is great. And it's a much more favorable reaction. If you look at what Sound Exchange was hoping for in terms of royalty rates, they were looking for about a quarter of a penny.
Oh, so they were 40% off the mark?
Yeah.
Just ballparking? Yeah.
So, and of course, Sound Exchange was not pleased. They released a comment that said this will erode the value of music in our economy.
I almost wonder if the regulators, who made the decision?
Copyright royalty.
Okay, those guys.
Yeah.
I almost wonder if they looked at, because they probably want to engender competition and they want to make this work. And I almost wonder if they're like, okay, what does Pandora need to not die?
Yeah, I think that's an element of it. The online internet radio business leans on like the kind of the terrestrial radio model.
Right.
Like the royalty rate agreements are slightly different than what you have for the on-demand business, and it will be interesting to see how this plays out for Pandora's rumored on-demand service via the RDO acquisition.
Yeah.
That's something that it's tough because they had this really great ruling here, but then they're going to have to go back to those same labels without the CRB.
Hi, guys.
And say, hey guys, like we have this really awesome royalty rate agreement now. So what do you want to do on an on-demand basis? So that's certainly something to watch. I think rumors have that possibly being something in late 2016 that comes out. So, they have to set up the entire infrastructure for that.
Right.
They didn't acquire any of the label agreements when they acquired RDO. So, it's a little bit tougher. I don't know that we'll see it. I don't know we'll see an on-demand streaming option from them anytime soon.
Cool. Well, Dylan, we'll see you in the new year.
Yeah.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you.
And if you're a loyal listener and have questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. Just email us at industryfocus@fool.com. Again, that's industryfocus@fool.com. And as always, people on this program may have interest in the stocks they talk about, and the Motley Fool may have formal recommendations for or against those stocks, so don't buy or sell anything based solely on what you hear on this program. For Dylan Lewis, I'm Sean O'Reilly. Happy New Year, and may the force be with you.